Today's meeting is held in conjunction with the Blue Company, and I will be introducing my team shortly. My name is Sarah Ndwiga, and I'm from Ndwiga Law. And today we will be taking you through business continuity. And in specific, we will be looking at how to engineer a business that outlives one as a founder. I'd like us to begin with the KPMG Global Family Business Report that was revealed and issued yesterday. This is a global worldwide report that had taken statistics and findings from family businesses. And here was an interesting thing that we were able to find out that sets the course for our engagement with you today. Firstly, businesses identifying as family-run operating businesses are projected to decline from 49% to 12% by 2035. Secondly, 59% of the respondents in this report noted that navigating the next chapter up to 2035 will be tougher than the last. And here's why this is very interesting. We are maneuvering a market that has a lot of macroeconomic challenges. There are tech challenges in the upsurge of AI. Founders have been using AI to lead their teams and to hasten the work processes that they have. But only 33% of them have been able to implement fully comprehensive corporate risk and business continuity systems in their businesses. That's what is on the global front. And I'd like us to focus on Kenya and Africa, closer home. 76% of businesses don't have a documented succession plan. 17% of them only survive beyond the third generation. 19% of African family farms have a constitution or charter that governs what happens when there are disputes and what happens in every intended succession. Further, 60% of these businesses in Kenya are family-owned businesses. And this is really representative of how it is in the Pan-African market, where a majority of businesses that are in the countries that we represent and we have dealt with are also family operated. I'll take us through these 3 pointers just to give an understanding on where we are currently. A founder builds a business and also builds a dependency on themselves. So as the business grows, the business continually becomes dependent on the founder for insight, for signing rights, to give a financial sign off on checks. And what we found is that as the businesses diversify, the founder is now stretched thin. The business grows, but the issues that are largely dependent on the founder still remain unresolved until a crisis happens, that there's no one to step in place for the founder. And the question we have been asking ourselves really is, with the right structures, can the weight that the founder carries when they're gone be successively handled through generations? My colleagues now will take us through this very cogent points that we will cover during this presentation. And what you will see before you are the delineation of what continuity means, and specifically business and operating continuity. We will also give you the market evidence of family-operated businesses that have been run by founders, such as yourselves, how they grew and what challenges they faced. And we will also uncover the layers in the Kenyan market in which Kenyan founders operate in and should ensure that they maneuver within their businesses to ensure that their businesses can be passed to the next generation successfully. Then we will also unbank certain founder myths, and we will be reaching out to you just to find out what you think about the myths that we will have on in the successive slides that my colleagues will run us through. And we'll also show you how to structure your own business continuity blueprint within your firm. I'll let my colleague Gerald take us through.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you've had a good start to your morning, and thank you for joining us for this insightful webinar. So, from what we've been able to elaborate until this point, we've been able to see that business continuity should not be something that we just put in the background of us running our own businesses, but it should be something at the forefront that guides us through this period that we are in when we are running our businesses and after. So from our analysis, we've been able to think around and come up with two phases or two kinds, what we'll call kinds of business continuity. And the first one is operational continuity. Operational continuity is ideally what keeps the ball rolling each, day and every day, signing mandates, who do we, contractors, who do we need to pay, all that. And the other part that always remains in the background that many founders and business operators don't follow along with is normally the legal continuity section, which will be the bulk of what we are going to be able to cover today. So sorry for that. Now we're going to now look at the market evidence. We are going to look through three key businesses, family-owned businesses that were founded by founders, and we've been able to see how they've grown and unfortunately how many of them came crashing down in light of governance gaps and a lot of the continuity issues that we're going to address. So we're going to talk about Tuskys, we're going to talk about Nakomat, and also we're going to talk about Kampala Coach, which were very booming businesses in the 2010s, early 2000s, all through to the 2010s, and very many of them came crashing down early during the COVID era. Yeah. So what we're going to speak about here is ideally, we're going to give you tips and we're going to allow you to just be able to understand what exactly you're supposed to be looking out for when it comes to how you structure your own continuity within your own various businesses. And the first layer that we're going to talk about is the entity layer. So a majority of you, I'm sure, within this call operate different entities. You either operate as a sole proprietor, you operate as a partnership, or you operate as a company. And ideally, the question you need to be asking yourself, first of all, is, am I operating or am I operating under the right structure? And under the right structure, we mean, for example, if you're a sole proprietor, we know that when you basically register a business name, if you've not registered a company, you register a business name, the business runs under your KRA PIN, the banking mandates fall on your lap, and ideally, when it comes to succession, if you did not really think around maybe the succession plans, maybe come up with a will, then you put your family in disarray when it comes now to probate, because now the business will be subject to probate, and we know how that usually goes. It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, depending on the actors that you had around you during the tenancy of that business. So at this juncture, it's good enough for you to just understand the kind of entity you want to run. If it's a sole proprietor who runs on a business name, will have the same issues as a company which is running on a single director. So the idea here would be to figure out if what kind of business, and I think this is why you will need to seek legal advice. What kind of business works for you? Do you want to continue running a one-man show? That is a sole proprietorship. Do you want to involve other people? And if it is to involve other people, how will that architecture look like? Will it be a partnership? Will it be a company? And within that ecosystem, you need to also just understand the the legal issues that come with each outfit that you want to address, or the goals that you want to achieve at the end of your life cycle. And then we'll go to layer two, which is the ownership, right? You've decided you want to set up a sole proprietorship, right? Or you've decided you want to set up a company. So what exactly how do you want to navigate through the ownership phase? This ownership phase can be navigated in very many ways. You ideally, if you set up a company, you have an articles of association. This is that 20 to 30 page document that you normally set up when you are setting up a company, that you normally, it's the company's constitution. Either you draft it or you just decide, let's adopt the model articles in the company, in the Kenya's Companies Act. And what that means is that typically people just do them for the sake of just, I need to file this so that I set up a company. But it is important, if your focus is on continuity, if your focus is on your business succeeding beyond your lifetime, then it is an important and key document that you need to consider when it comes to, making decisions. Are there decisions that will be left to to the shareholders? You know, are there decisions that, can run without the input of the shareholders? It can be the directors that you've appointed at that point in time. What exactly are these ownership intricacies within your business? For example, we have businesses that, you might think around. For example, let's say you have 90% shareholding as a founder. What happens to those shares upon your passing? Is there like a clear plan of what will happen to them? Is the company going to purchase the share from your family? Have you devised a plan of how you're going to transfer those shares down along? So layer two is very critical when it comes to the constitutive documents forming up the company. Do we have shareholders agreement, which is also another agreement that follows up on the articles of association? The shareholders agreement should be able to delineate what happens to those shares after the lifetime of each of the shareholders. You know, will the company be allowed to buy back those shares, or will the company pay the family of the shareholder? There are very very many options. Will you take a life insurance policy against those shares, such that when upon maybe the passing of one shareholder, and those shares are and the life insurance policy is paid, do you buy those shares or do you just transfer that money to the family? So there are all those intricacies that you need to think around. And then the next layer would now be the governance layer, which is very key, because all these layers uh, build upon the other. The governance layer is, do you have a functioning board? Who are you choosing to be on this board? It's just not a friend, whom you wanted to set a company with? Is this someone you can rely on when it comes to, decisions that uh, will need uh, will need the business to succeed, right? Uh, Ideally, also within this governance structure, we will need to tinker around what we mean when it comes to decision making. Decision making by the board. What happens if there's a deadlock? Dispute resolution. These are some of the key things that we need to think around. Governance issues. If you look at for companies that are listed in the Nairobi Securities Exchange, I'm sure there are some of you who work there. We have the Capital Markets Authority Code of Corporate Governance and Practice for Issues of Security to the Public of 2015, that for companies that are listed, basically emphasizes that all companies that are listed in the Securities Exchange are bound by the code and are supposed to have clearly set up succession plans for the board and senior management of a company. And these clearly set out succession plans need to fall, need to be, need to be discussed early on, even when, need to be discussed when the company, even when it's not like an issue yet within the company's ecosystem. You might be doing well, you might be making profits, but and everyone is on the right page right now. But let's say, for example, a director gets sick or the founder gets sick. How do we navigate around governance issues? How do we navigate around reserved matters that were reserved for maybe two shareholders who are sick? Do we have a situation whereby we can have alternate directors come in, step in? Do we have a situation in which we can be able to understand what this what the governance mechanisms of a company are, you know. And the next layer would be the people, right? Because as we've discussed, all these things lead to one another. Who are the people you've put up within the business to spearhead? If the management is there spearheading the day-to-day, who do we have running the day-to-day, the operational continuity that we're talking about? Do we have the right people running the businesses? Or what kind of person would you want to be running your business, and making you money at the end of the day, right? So succession of shares without so you need to, as a founder, you need to start thinking around who's going to succeed me. For example, if you don't want to let go, if you want this business to continue, are we breeding the next generation? Have you started involving your children uh, within the day-to-day running? It doesn't mean that they have signing mandates, but do they really understand what you're doing? Do they understand the business? And I feel like we've been able to see a bit more succession within the Indian community in Kenya, where you know, they've been able to figure out how to, successfully move their children to management and all that. Is that something that all other founder-led businesses within Kenya can attract? And the idea now would be for the business to sit down and think around, how do I want to introduce my children to this? If my children do not want to join the business, who do I find, to run the day-to-day of this business? And then this again goes down to layer 5, which is on the assets and money, the business. When it comes to continuity, I think this is a very key thing. And I think for here, this mostly will affect, sole proprietors. The properties that the company owns or the founder owns, are they part of the company or where are they? When it comes to, for example, land and vehicles, you know, who are they under? Are they under the business, or are they registered under the business, or are they registered under the company? Um, so the idea would be to just understand the layers around this, because for founders also, some of them we've seen have been able to intertwine company property with family owned property. For example, I'm sure many of you were able to see the Britam case, where the founder of Britam had they had lived with the wife for all these years, and they had bought a matrimonial home that was set up within the company structures, company property. And when it came to who was supposed to take over upon their divorce, it became a really big issue, right? And the issue here was the the husband decided to transfer the property to the company without the wife's consent. And ideally, that already brought, now the company was being brought into a legal dispute that it wasn't party to begin with. So I think here it is to just have a property portfolio of what belongs to the business, what belongs to the founder, and if it belongs to the founder and he wants it to be party and parcel to the business, how will the business treat these entities, right? And if it is to the founder, I think another way should be for you to think around how you would want to, how you would want to be able to ensure these properties that you own are secured within your family. So we might have to think around maybe a trust setup. We might have to think around how maybe you need to do a will that delineates which property goes to who, right? And after the asset and money protective layer, then the idea now goes to layer 6, which is the family and estate interface. As we've known, many of you are running businesses, and it is important for you to make a distinction between what you want to remain a family business and what you want to remain, like a corporate business. And it is very important for founders to be able to get a distinction of the two, because you might think that that business you're running is family business, but at the end of the day, it might not be the right outfit for that, right? So you need to think around, um, if this business is going to succeed me, in what way is my family still going to benefit from it beyond my lifetime? If maybe after the declaration of dividends, do the dividends go to my trust that I've set up on the side so that my family is able to benefit from it? You know, um, you need to think around that, because many businesses, if your business is to succeed you, then it needs to operate on its own without without your, how do I say this? Without your without your sorry for that. Without your interference with the day-to-day running of that particular business. And this is where now you need to you need to sit down with your lawyer and think around, how am I going to manage this asset? So the next thing that I think we've been able to address, so we're just now going to look at the legal autopsies. I'm sure many of you saw Tuskies, and some of us grew Tuskies and liked the Tuskies, hot dogs that they were at that particular point in time. I'm not sure. Nowadays, I see people say, quick mart hot dogs, but I really like the Tuskies ones. So, and within the Tuskies ownership structure, you saw that once the you know once the when once it came to the succession of that business, the ownership passed to the siblings without an agreed controlled architecture. What that meant is that now everyone was bringing each other to court, and we saw these family members intervened directly the management of the company. There was a public removal of the CEO, as you saw in 2016, and there was also internal fraud, debt fueled expansion that wasn't really going anywhere. And that really became like a pain point for how the company ended up going down. And if you look at the layers that we've been able to address, layers 2, 3, and 6, which is, the ownership layer, the governance layer, and also the family and estate layer. It needs to be very clear for you as a founder. How is my family going to benefit from this outfit, whether directly or indirectly? And this is where I've said we need to start thinking around, does anyone in my family want to inherit this business? You know, and if they don't, how do I still ensure that they continue to benefit from it beyond the structure of the company? This is where maybe, as I said, you might need to think around how you come up with maybe a trust that dividends are paid into and your family continues to benefit from the business without your actual interference with it. The next company we're going to look at was Nakumat. I'm sure many of you saw the rise and fall of Nakumat, right? And during that time in the news cycle, we saw it was just represented as a liquidity crisis. They didn't have money, or they shoot too close to the sun. But a cursory reading of the court documents that were filed showed that it was, the creditors described it as an internal control failure at scale. And what this means is that there was a governance gap and also an operational gap. The people who were supposed to see the red flags, decided to turn a blind eye. And ideally, the board also, since they were also not directly involved, or they weren't in a way involved in the day-to-day, left all these things to run, and we saw how that happened to them. And this is why we see again layer 3 and 5 coming to play. The business, the governance, as I said, and also the asset and money reach. We saw they had all these assets, but now, now all of them fell to the creditors, and the man the management route of insolvency at the end of it all. And I think it is important for us to be able to just think around all these operational gaps that we might have. For those who ply the Western routes within this country, uh, for those who ply the Western route, we have Kampala Coach, which we saw that the death of its founder was basically the end of the business, right? There was no proper successor management, train operations amid shareholder litigation and tax arrears. And what that meant is that once the founder died, creditors came up to collect their dues, and that was really the end of a company that had thrived throughout the 90s and the early 2010s and the early 2000s to its official demise after the founder died in the 2010s. So I think having addressed that, I think I will hand it over now to my colleague to just address the issue of integrity as a continuity infrastructure as well. Thank you.
Morning, my name is Wairimu Gakobo. I'll be taking you for this bit of the presentation. I hope you've had a lovely morning and we're glad to have you here. So we'll start with integrity as a continuity infrastructure. Most of you here, and thank you to our facilitator, the Blue Camp. The legal expression point of the Blue Camp, the Bribery Act. You may think of it as, just another legal mechanism to control business, which we have also seen the need to control, seeing as to it has been estimated that Kenya loses 608 billion annually due to corruption. So that act is just a succession wearing another cap. A business that runs on the relationships nobody can see is doomed to fail once the founder dies. And this a business that has systems running in place will continue even after the death of the founder. So we'll move on to sectors, sector profiles, and how continuity applies to each of them. And the first one that is retail and distribution. So this anchors on contracts, that is distributorships, franchise for those who are operating in different countries, and supplier credit terms. So this is heavily dependent on the kind of structure you decide to run with as per the layers. So because it involves tills, agency banking, and mobile money custody, which must survive the founder. This comes down to now the accounts having more than one signatory. In case one is not available, the business doesn't come to a standstill. Then we move on to the professional services and agency. So here the founder is the business. In most cases, they decide to operate on their own or use sole proprietorships. The key for this again is the vehicle that you decide to run with and the kind of structure you decide to put in place. There are existing client relationships which should essentially supersede the founder's death. The hardest continuity problem here is what kind of a structure do we now use? If it's a partnership, is there a partnership bid in place, and has it set out what happens in case of the death of one partner? Then moving on to healthcare. This has some similarities with professional services again, but for healthcare, the license is personal. So the license then dies with the death of the founder. But if there is a structure in place, say a partnership in place, and the other founder is compliant, then the business will continue even after the death of the founders. And then moving on to manufacturing and agribusiness. I'm sure most of us are experienced mostly in agribusiness and also in manufacturing, SMEs, people opting to trade under their names or under sole proprietorships. These agribusinesses have assets, both movable and that is land. There are vehicles, there are tractors. So essentially, instead of having this under the founder and having to take them through probate once the founder is dead, you can have them registered under the business vehicle that is under the company or under the partnership. Then moving on to real estate and family land. So for this, there is rental income that is always trickling in, and that can be locked down in probate once the founder passes. And if these properties were registered in the founder's name rather than in an entity, what will happen is if they were owned in a trust, they don't have to go through probate and the business keeps. And now we will engage in something interactive. So we will have a poll. We call it the founder dependence test. I'd urge every one of you to participate. So you can see it coming up on your screen. There are questions there. Please go ahead and take to do this. Just take whichever applies to you and your business. Let's see how dependent your business is on you as the founder. So let us now see how dependent the businesses are on you as the founders. Let's start with the first one. At least 2 people can sign at the bank today. So the turnout is very low, below 25%. So this means that for most of us in this webinar, we are the sole signatories, the bank of our business. Well, so the question I will pose to you as the founder is, what happens when you travel and something financial needs to happen, a withdrawal needs to happen, a transaction needs? What happens when you fall ill? What happens when you might be incapacitated, or what will happen to your business if you died? So I believe can now answer and see why you need at least 2 people who can co-sign on the bank account. And this is not your personal bank, again, structures. This is on the entity's bank account. This is on the company's bank account. Let's move on to the next statement. No business asset, land, vehicles, tills sit in the founder's personal name. Again, the turnout is at 14%. So what this means, for most of us here, the assets, both movable and immovable, in our businesses are registered to our name. So what will happen then upon your death? This means that they will be tied to probate, and families, there might be someone contesting, and to some extent the business might stall for years and years until the issue is resolved in court. So again, this also means that the assets sitting in your personal name, they should be in the entity's name. Moving on. The articles of association have been read and amended, if needed, since incorporation. 11% of you voted yes, still a low turnout. This means that, as my colleagues had talked on it a while earlier, most of you during incorporation of your companies adopted the model articles and associations provided by the company registry. This is then a call to you to now read the articles and amend them to fit the structure of the. Then the next question, the next statement, a shareholders agreement covers death, incapacity, and deadlock with evaluation from your shares. So 8% of you yielded to this. Again, this touches on the setup of the entities. So that as well needs to be treated. Then the next statement, the board could lawfully meet and decide without the founder tomorrow. This got 8%, 8% yes, percent. So then what this tells us is that, again, comes back to the type of vehicle we choose for our businesses. This would indicate them are sole proprietorships. The founder is here today. It's a call to you to revisit that structure. Then the next statement, the founder's will is valid and current since the last marriage, birth, or major acquisition. This had a low turnout a year of 6%. What this means is that founders, it's a wake-up call to now do your estate planning ahead of anything. We usually say that a will is not a call. A will is just you putting your affairs in chance to. The eighth one, an access register exists for credentials, PIN, title documents, and policies. It's got a vote of 6% as well. That's a very low turnout. Another question I would now found in there is what happens when you have traveled, when you are incapacitated, when you are ill, or when you die and the business operations need to run? How do your staff get access to these documents for different transactions to take place? And does it then mean that the credentials being used for your business are your personal credentials? If the answer is a yes, then you need to book a class after. A successor is named and being deliberately developed. It got a year of 8%. This comes back to succession planning for your business. And then the last statement. Sorry. Every personal guarantee is mapped out and known within the family. It got a vote of 8%. It comes back to succession planning. Then the next one, an access register exists for credentials and policies. Sorry for that. Every personal guarantee is mapped and known with the family. We talked about estate planning. Please give us a call to that. And for the last bit, this is the overall. All of the above was reviewed within the last 12 months. It got a year of 11%. My call to the founders based on the poll is business continuity, important and key. And based on this, I would say we will be looking forward to help you. But then I
Thank you very much. And I would like to um, talk about these 5 founder myths and try best I can to answer them as I'm also answering the chat questions. And I really do want to thank everyone who's been penning the comments and questions on the chat section. We have been appropriately answering to each one. And yes, the myth number 1, my spouse will just step in. This may or may not work for 2 things. First, if the founder is running a company that he has shares in, and in the Articles of Association, a clear succession on who will step in as the wheels with which this company will run, then it is very clear that a spouse can easily be absorbed into the company when the founder steps away on the happening of death. If it is a business name, then that becomes a little bit complicated because sole proprietorships die on the passing of the founder. It dies with the founder. the way it is registered. Even the filings with KRA are done directly by the founder. But a company is a separate legal person from the founder. And hence, yes, with the right documentation in place in the articles and also in the shareholder agreements and successive agreements that we've discussed here, governing how the family can step in and continue on when one person passes, that can work. Number two, I have a will, so we are covered. Yes, we would like to say that we needed to mention this as a very important part of business continuity for two reasons. First, it should be very clear that one's shares in a company cannot be willed in a will. You can set an intention on how you want to have the shares transferred in your company on your passing, but those shares must be probated, and that process takes long. So we need our founders to understand what can be featured in a will that can pass through the next layer of succession on their passing very easily without having to be brought or taken through the course of probate within the family courts. And thirdly, what the will does is it answers number three, we are too small for this. Everyone can be able to set out a minuscule agenda of what they need to do when they're not around and who needs to action that. And it's very important to have that in writing because it sets the goal of where one would want to see their business or their legacy be passed on to the right people and into the right structures. So the will sets in course the documents and it gives life to the other documents that one would be needing to create to ensure that the succession in their businesses passes without any gap and without any administrative or court-related delay. Number four, trusts are for the ultra rich. I'd say this is not true because Kenyans are very business savvy, and to that end, trusts have been set up to ensure that for the business savvy founder, setting certain properties to be in a living testament can work depending on the intention of having those properties set up in that vehicle in the first place. So trusts, again, a very important factor for business savvy founders to look at in relation to separating assets that are for the business and assets that are to remain within the family and be managed and run and also income generated in a specific way. So again, I debunk four as false. My children will sort it out. This is a problem that a lot of us Kenyans go with, and I think there are historical and colonial reasons on this because particularly where half of me comes from, we say that we do not divide ourselves in our lifetime. And talking about death is actually, courting death to come in the first place. So leaving the children to do the guesswork when you're out of the picture is a very dangerous trend. And a lot of founders, with the best of intention, have the children knowing what they need to do, but only when it's at a crisis point. And only when it's at the breaking point are the children now reeled in to kind of understand what the founder wanted to run for them for their sake and now for the next generation. And my children will sort it out is really ruling from the grave, and that does not work. So I will want to go to the next slide, which now looks at what we do as a firm for our clients when we are moving them from the diagnosis stage. This is where they currently are. This is where their assets lie. These are the key point personnel within their offices. And to try and find out if the structures that they have currently are future fit. And if not, we help our clients map their journey from the very beginning to the very end. And for the benefit of this webinar, we will show you how this runs. So if we start at phase 1, call it diagnosis, same thing that you do when you go to the doctor, where the doctor asks you, how are you and what is ailing you? Initially, it may seem that it is just, I have a company and we have shares, but right now the company is growing. We don't know how to value the company. We don't know what the articles are because the person who set up the company for us just, told us they downloaded the model articles, but we want our company to be governed in a certain way so that we can have room to drive future business and ensure we always meet top line. And here now, this is where we look at the share structure, do a search on the company, check for the intellectual property that the company has or the founder has that enables them run with a certain trade name, whether that has been protected or not. We will also look at who the beneficial owners are of the companies, and we also ask and audit our clients at the very beginning to have them tell us where they see the company in the next 10 to 25 years. So that is just done by a legacy audit, and it sets out the legacy map for you. What it helps you do is enable you see the exposures and the gaps that you have within your businesses that you need to work on immediately. Secondly, we move to stabilization. So here we look at how we can be able to make the company less dependent on you and give you freedom to move with ease, whether it is getting you the right staff or ensuring that the right staff are contracted around you and they are working, that you have identified for yourself the advisors who will be running the company and they are properly placed within your entity. This is company, this is an LLP, this is also a business. And here, what we also look at is with the first phase, we always ask whether you have a will in place because that then determines how your assets will be structured. When we move to the third phase, we now start looking at yourself as an unique individual with a unique mind and a unique idea of how you want to pass on your legacy. And here, this is where we now set up the right structures and put them in the right vehicles. And, looking at whether the entity has been set up as a company, that determines the particular structure that one would normally focus in will lie in the regime of the company's act. Different companies arrange them in a different way, or you just have that one company that works for you, and we streamline it and help you ensure that you can be able to step out even for a month, and that company can run without you. We'll also look at and give you the agreements that would be suitable for your particular entity. If it's a LLP, as a suit partnership agreement based on what you want to achieve that has not been captured in writing. With the company, a suite shareholders agreement to ensure that you focus on ensuring that the people who you're running this business with will be able to make peace with you if there's a deadlock, if there's a dispute, and have the maturity and capacity to handle that, and also build the business with you. Thirdly, if you're looking at a business, here, this is where we say, yes, the business as a sole, as registered, just merely as a business name has its own limitations, which we had covered before, and we will be able to map out what works for you based on what you have dreamt up. Then again, phase 4, the actual embedment, that is also involves the corporate governance mechanisms and the implementing of the succession planning for you to ensure that you can be able to see a flow of continuity and to be able to see the strength that you've been able to pull to push you in the next 5-year blocks, next 5 years, successive other 5 years. And as you grow, the company or the entity and the business that you have also grows with you. So I'll move to the next slide in the interest of time. Here, we are looking at what we started with, and I remember telling you about the yesterday's launch of the Global Family Business Report that was issued by KPMG. The law has offered immortality by structure. And here, this is the fact that you can have a company that is a separate legal person from one. And Kenya has made its strides in updating the Companies Act. The Business Laws Amendment Act has also come in to assist in the ease of business in Kenya. We also are seeing a move to make investment in Kenya very easy through amendments that in the Income Tax Act, and also the regime is business ready. Every other day we hear of a UN setup here in the country, or a big conglomerate coming into the country, and it's evidence of the fact that the regime is ready for growth of businesses. But what then happens to founders? It's the assembly, the putting in together of the structures, what Gerald was talking about, the layers of continuity, and what Wairimu was talking about, the actual fit out to ensure that this structure that you have is able to be governed, is able to be held accountable to itself, and it is able to pass on to the right people when the right time comes. And again, banking on our corporate governance standards, we really look at integrity and accountability. If the integrity system in your business is properly run, then at the very least, it must be documented. Not so that you can not only be accountable to yourself, but also to the business that you have set up, where livelihoods of many others depend on. And it's a call for us to always look inward as we're looking to the growth of our businesses, because they are run by humans who we need to ensure they take us to the next level. So at the very least, if we get the systems right, if we document what needs to be documented, if we put in place our personal financial and succession hygiene in place, then that easily replicates into the businesses that we own. And finally, yes, integrity is a business, integrity builds a business that's worth keeping, and continuity is how it's kept. And I'm really, really, really glad that we are getting the right comments coming in. And I'll just, for the interest of time, request if we could just have I could have 1 minute to answer Chris, who on the chat section says that what should a founder do to be intentional if the business is limited by guarantee and only has 2 directors, with one who came on board and only to assist with registration? How do we address we are too small for this? That's a brilliant question, Chris, because it touches on the structure that had been chosen. What was the intention of having the company limited by guarantee in the first place? Was it a not-for-profit? Was it an entity or an enterprise that was for, say, foundation purpose? Because companies limited by guarantee are either in the not-for-profit sector. So you may need to look at the intention first to see if indeed you are placed in the right place that would assist you move. Yes, and thank you for answering. It was a not-for-profit social enterprise. Further, in the articles of association, did you use the model articles, or did you work on suit articles to ensure that, you can have a sit down with a person who was only registered merely to pass on the registration approval? Is this person in a capacity to, be in the business? And if so, if not, then you need to look at doing an amendment of the articles just to allow for that. And we can have a talk on the end on how we can be able to just answer the key questions that allow this not-for-profit enterprise to be able to run itself. A third thing, Chris, I'd like to also note out is, for the articles we prepare, we normally have suite policies that are in place. Were those ever done for yours? And if not, we would need to speak after this call. I would like to answer Irene Karuga's question. She had asked a follow-up question: does every business need to follow this path? Yes. And I believe this is a path where we had set out three ideal structures that we set up for our 56 and counting clients who are really hitting their profit high after they have delineated their structures. Yes, it is important to start where you are, even if that means you will have one person who's running in the management team, one person who is in the family council, and another person who sits in the board of directors, and that can be you, yourself and your spouse, or yourself, and a technocrat who's able to run the business for you. You can have it informally set up, and we can help you map how that can work in year 0 to 5 in a small business, year 5 to 10 during the growth stage, and further, so that at every stage the documents change and they morph as you grow as well. Third, we had another question. Another comment coming in from Daniela Burili Makanu. Thank you so much. You said it very well. A proper and well-structured business allows for business continuity to be well-structured as well. Thank you so much for your comment, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you again. Again, we have another question coming in. Wonderful. Caroline, you asked, please clarify, can we transfer our businesses for profit to trust, and how does that work? Wonderful. I'll go back to the very first question. What was the intention of structuring the business, and how is it set up currently? You can have a trust for many reasons. A lot of times a trust is set up to ensure that assets that are to be preserved for the family, or income that is to be earned from the business, goes into a vehicle that can allow a certain passage of that income to go in a tax efficient manner. And that's why a lot of people think around trusts as, they set up their businesses or they start moving around property. And there's income now coming in from the businesses as well as a third point. So yes, you can have your company running, and you can structure your company in a way that reduces your tax. We're not calling for tax avoidance, we're calling for tax efficient, that you can have a structure or structures that are tax efficient to enable you maneuver the market properly. And then, yes, for the issue on how you can move the businesses for profit to trust, I'd say, again, the intention of the trust should be very clear from the get-go. And sometimes, and this has been well documented, if a trust is set up for purposes of evasion of trust or movement of monies without them being clearly accounted for, then they can, at the point of registration, be disallowed by the registrar. So we need to be very clear on why you want to set up the trust in the first place and what its purpose will be, because that then now governs how the businesses you have can work towards, ensuring that it's income coming from the business to the trust, and it's declared in a specific manner that gives to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And then secondly, for the issue of the trust itself, can it run as the same manner as a business would? I doubt it would. It's an estate planning vehicle, or a vehicle to ensure that who you intend to set up that trust for actually benefits from it. Yeah. So I think I hope I've been able to answer you, and I'm happy to take this off our call. Thank you so much, Voyo. You had asked, yes, can you help transfer a business from sole proprietorship to a limited company? Yes, it is possible to do the conversion of a business into a company, and the company's portal allows for that, and we'd be happy to show you what is required. It's a very fairly straightforward process, and that then helps. Can a company move back to business? No. Can a business convert into LLP? Yes. Can a trust be a move to company? No. Can a company move to trust? No. You need to dismantle. You need to properly know why you're setting up the trust first, so that now you can incorporate it properly. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone who has participated in today's webinar. We have had such a wonderful time taking you through this. It's a content-heavy webinar, and I'm grateful for your time, in that we've been able to cover heavy material and condensed it in a way that is understandable to everyone. And for that, asante sana for your time, and also logging in on and just sitting in and listening to us give you certainty that you can be able to run your business very well and have it continue when you're not there to speak for it. Thank you so much. I'll have my colleagues just also turn on their cameras as we close. Asante sana, Gerald. Asante, Virginia. Asante, Wairimo, for the excellent moderation. And see you next time, guys. Thank you.